Sup, chooms, how y'all living? Hope everything is Nova and you're all having a preem week. So, do you guys remember the carnivore diet video I made a few weeks ago? Quick recap. I made a very long video a few weeks ago where I went over some of the fallacious arguments that carnivore dieters use to justify their diet, like the naturalistic fallacy, the mechanistic fallacy, and of course the ad hominem fallacy. In that video, I reacted to several prominent carnivore or keto-promoting YouTubers, including Steak and Butter Gal, Bark K, and Eric Berg. Pretty much everyone who has gone down the whole carnivore diet rabbit hole has heard of these people. They're celebrities in that community. But there was another person I responded to who I would say is a growing star in the carnivore diet space named Eddie. Eddie sticks out amongst the other carnivore diet influencers I mentioned, as his channel is relatively new and his audience is still pretty small, so you may be wondering why I decided to respond to Eddie at all in my original video. Well, truth be told, I was actually going to use Bark K as an example of the mechanistic fallacy. There were a couple of problems with this though. The first problem was that most of Bark K's videos are reaction videos, so if I were to respond to him, I'd have to give context to the video he was responding to, which I think would have made my videos lose focus and probably run a little too long as well. And also, Bark K has a very strong accent, so he's a little hard for me to understand since, I'm a Yankee. I did notice, though, that in a few of Bark K's videos that he featured Eddie on his channel, so out of curiosity, I checked out Eddie's channel, and it turned out he had exactly what I was hoping to find on Bark K's channel, so I decided to respond to him since he's kind of like a younger and less bald version of Bark K. So, I knew when I uploaded my video that Eddie would be the most likely person to respond. He has the smallest channel, so he has the most to gain by making a response video, and that's fine. I took a swing first, and he has the right to defend his video, so I don't hold that against him. But what I didn't expect was a 4-hour-long response video. When I saw the length of the video, I assumed he must have responded to my entire video, which is 1 hour and 34 minutes long. But even in that case, a 4-hour-long response video is unnecessarily long. As it turns out though, his response is not a response to my entire video, it's just him responding to the segment where I featured his video, which only makes up about 30 minutes of the total video. So, essentially, Eddie's response video is 30 minutes of me and 3.5 hours of Eddie pontificating and bloviating. Seriously, I have never heard anyone say so much without actually saying anything at all, but since the video was about me, I still felt obligated to force myself to watch the whole 4 hours of the video. But there's certainly no reason for you to have to waste 4 hours of your life too, so I thought I'd just go ahead and summarize some of the high points as well as some of the low points of his video and then respond to it. I have to admit though, that when I saw the length of the video, I was tempted to just say, fuck it, this kid can say what he wants, he can think what he wants, but I'm done with them. I don't know what Eddie was thinking making his response video this ridiculously long. I mean, maybe he thought that since no one is going to watch a 4-hour rebuttal video anyways, let's just go ahead and assume that he destroyed all my arguments without actually watching it themselves. But unfortunately, you'd have to actually watch his video to see just how repetitive and vacuous his response really is. It's really surreal to watch. I mean, for 90% of the video, you wouldn't even be able to tell he's responding to me at all. Usually it just sounds like he's talking to himself while he also spends a lot of time yelling at the screen and going off into weird philosophical tangents about diet. Most of the video is Eddie digressing on unrelated subjects. He talks about politics, democracy, theology, Christianity, quantum mechanics, morality, rage, artificial intelligence, the definition of a fact, the definition of being healthy, what's the meaning of normal, who killed Jeffrey Epstein, etc., and so on and so forth. Actually, I made up the last part, but all the other digressions really did happen in the video, which is one of the reasons why it's so damn long. And for such an incredibly long response video, he doesn't really respond to any of my points. He spends a lot of time arguing over semantics, kind of like Bill Clinton when he was asked what the meaning of is. Eddie doesn't read any of the articles I present, nor does he show any sign that he's ever read any of these very important articles. He doesn't provide any evidence-based data to counter my claims, and instead, he just spends the entire video insulting me, insulting my audience, and insulting the people who actually do scientific research while providing absolutely zero scientific research himself. This is a 4-hour-long video, and not once does he reference a single scientific article. Not once. There are no sources he cites in the description, absolutely nothing. This video from Eddie is 100% evidence-free. So, even though Eddie accuses me of just presenting opinions and not facts, this whole video by Eddie is literally just Eddie's opinions, not backed up by any evidence at all, and at no point does he even bother trying to explain why his opinion is superior to anyone else's. So being that this is a 4-hour video, I'm obviously not going to go over the whole thing point by point. And fortunately, I don't have to because like I said, Eddie is basically saying nothing for 90% of this video. So let me show you some of the ways he responds to the points I made in my video. So this is how he chooses to begin his video. No, it's not just that, it's
yes, you moron.
The appeal to nature fallacy.
Ah, there it is. Wow. You idiot. Get the out of here, you moron. Who the do you think you are? Get the out of here. Well, anyway, you arrogant Are you watching Haircafe? You're a imbecile.
So it's pretty obvious that this kid cannot keep his cool when he's confronting opinions from people who don't agree with him. This guy spends most of the video talking about me like I just slept with his wife or something. All I did in my original video was present some data to challenge some of the claims he made in another video. There's no need to get this upset, Eddie.
And this is a perfect example of it. Despite being over twice my age, I presume that you are going to exhibit a level of maturity that is vastly lower than mine, and not just with respect to animated behavior and juvenile humor, but I mean with respect to intellectual maturity.
So he calls me immature, but what mature person do you know who acts like this whenever someone tells them they should eat their vegetables?
Duh. You just said, that is false. Wrong. Wrong. Duh. Okay. Source, bro? Source? We'll see.
So those are just some of the examples in the video of Eddie showing just how much more mature he is than me. Other times, he gets real upset for no good reason at all. They see in their office.
No, I'm saying that the population that could be referred to in order to formulate guidelines, they must actually, not could, they must be based on individual doctors' offices. You moron.
Only toddlers get this upset when adults tell them they should eat their vegetables. Anyways, let's go ahead and watch some more clips.
I believe that this man is a vegan. So.
Yes, I'm a vegan, but I'm a vegan for ethical reasons, not health reasons. My video has absolutely nothing to do with veganism or ethics, so bringing up my veganism is a complete red herring, and from his point of view, it's an ad hominem attack. I don't even end up recommending a vegan diet as the ideal human diet, so you bringing this up is completely irrelevant.
Anyway.
After a nuclear war, or maybe it will happen if we change the educational requirements to be a doctor from MD to GED and we make Lauren Boebert a cardiologist. But I don't think that's going.
Oh, my God. So now you're inserting politics in a gratuitous fashion when politics don't belong here.
It was just a joke, Eddie, and it has nothing to do with Lauren Boebert being a Republican. It's just that everybody thinks she's stupid, including the people who voted for her. I should know. I live in her district. Eddie perseverates about this Lauren Boebert joke, and he rambles about politics for several minutes after this. It's really not necessary, Eddie. I just said it for the sake of levity. I'm impressed that he's a published author at the age of 22, even if the book he published is really just 400 pages of nutritional satire.
Well, it's not nutritional satire. You haven't read it, so you have no idea what you're talking about.
Okay, so I will admit that I did take some cheap shots at Eddie's book, and I do regret that. Honestly, I am genuinely impressed that he wrote and published a 400-page book as a young man, even if the content probably contains stuff I mostly disagree with, especially since most Gen Z kids these days don't even read books at all. So I do apologize for bashing your book, Eddie. I'm sorry.
I suspect that this is going to lead into an appeal to authority very quickly. You sort of implied that just now, that you shouldn't be appealing to anyone that doesn't have any, administered credence conferred upon them by a governing institution or an authority agency.
So Eddie throughout the video complains about me appealing to authority, but at the same time he considers himself a figure of authority. What I do in the video is not an appeal to authority fallacy because I'm not basing my conclusions on the fact that the authors of the studies are authorities. They may be authorities, but they're basing their opinions on well-performed scientific studies that have sound methodology, large numbers of subjects, and reproducible results. So I am basing my opinion on the best available scientific data, not based on the fact that the data is coming from people who are authorities on the subject.
Frankly, you're moronic if you think that a doctor is someone that understands biochemistry, cellular biology, and nutrition.
So Eddie is totally generalizing about all doctors. He's correct that it is a fallacy to say that someone is right just because they're a doctor or a scientist, but it's also a fallacy to assume that they're always wrong. There may be some doctors who don't understand nutrition or statistics, but there are certainly many doctors who absolutely do. Eddie doesn't know anything about this specific doctor who replied to Cody, yet he's just assuming that the doctor is completely ignorant because he doesn't seem to think it's possible that a doctor can be educated in a subject like nutrition. Even if it were true that a doctor doesn't receive much nutritional education in medical school, which is debatable, there is nothing stopping a doctor from educating him or herself independently about the subject, much like Eddie did. Eddie claims he learned everything from online university courses, so what's to stop a doctor from learning about nutrition from reading books or scientific articles? The only one using the authority fallacy is Eddie because he considers himself an authority and he doesn't back up any of his claims with scientific evidence.
I've managed my symptoms on this diet with my condition hypermobile EDS more than I have with any other diet.
So Eddie briefly mentions how he has Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. I actually talked about this condition in a video which I'll link below, and Eddie brings it up because he claims that the carnivore diet helped his symptoms more than any other diet. So I think that probably explains why he's so defensive about the carnivore diet. I'm not aware of any actual research supporting the claim that the carnivore diet can help treat Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, but even if it can, it doesn't really matter because I'm not talking about the carnivore diet as it applies to Eddie, I'm talking about it as it applies to the general population, and Ehlers-Danlos syndrome is a very rare condition. So even if the carnivore diet helped Eddie, it is still harmful to most people. Sugar of 300 would be too high, or a potassium of 7 would be too high.
Right, but the whole point is that it depends on the context.
This is another digression, so I'm going to go ahead and skip this part, but I wanted to bring it up anyways because Eddie is making this way too complicated, like he does with everything else for that matter. He spends a lot of time talking about what are normal lab values, and what normal lab values are, they're just the average values in the general population that are established by testing the blood in thousands of people. It's really not that complicated.
I wouldn't really take this frankly, if you were saying this to my damn face, live. By the way. It's because it's a video.
Eddie, you're right. I wouldn't want to speak with you in person, but it has nothing to do with your beliefs. It's because, and I'm sorry to say this, but you're kind of a prick, bro. I mean, there are carnivore dieters I would probably speak face-to-face with, like Paul Zaladino, because as much as I disagree with him, at least he's chill and respectful. But you need anger management, kid. It's ridiculous that you're getting this upset about mainstream scientific opinions.
Anyway.
136 is way too high no matter what guideline you look at, and
according to whom? On the basis of what?
So Eddie is constantly asking things like, according to whom? And on the basis of what? Eddie, it's on the basis of scientific research. It's based on all the scientific literature. Eddie is making health claims all the time, so the only difference between Eddie and these authority figures that he condemns is that Eddie isn't backing up his arguments with evidence-based research. We're over 44 minutes into this video, and I haven't seen a single piece of scientific data cited by Eddie yet.
That is your opinion, Haircafe. Your opinion based on scientific consensus.
Getting my opinion from the scientific consensus? No, we can't have that. So Eddie is admitting that there is a scientific consensus behind what I say, and he's right, because my opinion is also the opinions of the experts who base their opinions on scientific research. You have your own opinions, Eddie, but they are not evidence-based.
That consensus disagreeing all the time, that consensus being composed of scientists that disagree with each other.
That doesn't make any sense, Eddie. If scientists disagreed with each other all the time, then it wouldn't be a consensus. There are outliers and expert opinions with every consensus, but that doesn't mean that there isn't a consensus.
Based on science that you don't know how to interpret, that I would suspect I know how to interpret far more than you do.
Okay, I don't know how to interpret scientific research, even though I have made hundreds of science-based videos where I've covered probably thousands of articles, and my videos have received praise, even from medical professionals. Fine, whatever you say, Eddie.
No, it's not wrong, because whenever you aggregate, even for guidelines, the people they're testing are in specific doctor's offices. You absolute moron.
Eddie is still wrong here. Labs don't base their normals on the patients of individual doctors in their own office. The normal values are based on much larger numbers of people than that. But it really triggered Eddie that I challenged him on this claim, so again, he makes tons of ad hominem attacks that we'll skip here. Case of Cody, his LDL is way too high, and this Eddie...
That is your opinion.
Yeah, well, you know, that's just like your opinion, man.
That's an appeal to consensus fallacy. We've been wrong throughout history. The majority of people have been wrong throughout history.
In the case of science, there have been some rare instances of science getting it wrong in the past, like Stephen Hawking being wrong about black holes, but overall, science usually gets it right. It just doesn't seem that way sometimes, since science deniers will often cherry-pick these instances where science does get it wrong to try to gaslight all the scientific literature. But science, despite its flaws, remains by far the best way to determine the truth about the universe.
Your intellect regarding this topic, these topics.
Yeah, that's pretty funny coming from a guy who was lecturing me about humility just a few moments ago. Of course, for taking your health advice over his doctor's, but he doesn't deserve
His doctor has no clue about nutrition or scientific interpretation. What he was trained in was pharmacology, symptomology, and certain etiologies. And by the way, the last of which was taught improperly, especially with regard to heart disease.
How do you know, Eddie? Do you know Corey's doctor? All you know about him is that he's a doctor. You have no idea how much he knows about nutrition or scientific interpretation. It's even possible, believe it or not, that maybe, just maybe, he even knows more than you. A little humility can go a long way, Eddie. Okay, so Eddie is claiming that the link between LDL cholesterol and heart disease is just an association.
Yes, and you cannot inform upon causality with an association alone under any circumstances that are actually seen in the real world.
So Eddie makes this claim again and again and again in the video like it's rhetorical kryptonite. This argument is the entire zeitgeist of his entire channel. Since Eddie will never accept that an association in a scientific study can prove causality, he completely rejects all human research studies, including population cohort studies, randomized controlled studies, meta-analyses, and essentially any human study that isn't just some in vitro biology study in a test tube. Eddie thinks that mechanistic data is more valuable than outcome data. This is an extremely fringe and radical position. If you really believe in Eddie's epistemology, then that would force you to accept many compromising positions, like believing that smoking has never been proven to cause cancer or heart disease. You couldn't even say that alcohol causes inebriation, since it is just an association. In fact, you couldn't even say that hypertension causes heart disease, but actually, Eddie does say this, and it's part of his theory as to what causes atherosclerosis. So, it is clear that Eddie is very selective in how he applies his epistemology, especially later on as he keeps changing his position on whether smoking causes lung cancer, as we'll soon see.
Causality should be strived towards, but you should always understand, especially in statistics, particularly in statistics, that you will never attain it.
So Eddie rejects literally all statistical inferences about causality. Instead, he has his own unique philosophy of science where the only accepted facts are things like simple chemical reactions that can be reproduced in a test tube, but that doesn't account for the vast complexities of human physiology. The only way to test for health outcomes is with human clinical studies. Most of the objections Eddie makes to clinical studies are overcome when randomized controlled studies are done because the treatment group and the control group are randomly assigned. So, just so long as the number of subjects is high enough, there is not going to be any significant difference in the characteristics of the two groups. So, theoretically, could the conclusions of a randomized controlled trial be wrong? Yes. Is it likely? No. But even if a randomized controlled trial is wrong, if you have lots of randomized controlled studies that all show the same outcome, then what you have is a reproducible result which is scientifically valid. The data on LDL cholesterol is not just based on one or two randomized controlled trials, it is based on hundreds of trials. It's literally the most heavily researched subject in the entire world. So Eddie is rejecting 99.99% of all studies that have ever been done based on his austere philosophy that since studies can't be 100% perfect, we should reject all of them. That's why I called him nihilistic, which really pissed him off, as we'll see later in this video.
All right. In statistics, you can make opinions based on associations. You cannot assert, responsibly speaking, causality. If you are to say that there is a causal relationship, that it's merely your opinion and nothing else. As soon as you break that standard, because, oh, well, the association is just so strong, though, and it's so repeatable. As soon as you break that standard, you have now opened up a door to extreme amounts of danger.
So Eddie will reject a study with hundreds of thousands of subjects, but yet at the same time, he'll treat his own N-of-1 anecdotal response to the carnivore diet as gospel. Eddie, I think it shows a real lack of humility to think that your anecdote constitutes a greater form of research than a meta-analysis with thousands of subjects. Is the research on LDL cholesterol perfect? No, it isn't. But is it better than the research on the carnivore diet? Yes, by many orders of magnitude it is. Much more than just a...
Oh, wow! Oh, look at this. Look at this. What is this word at the top right of the screen? Current opinion.
Eddie, what you believe is also just an opinion. So, should we disregard everything you say to Eddie? So yes, what Eddie showed us is a current opinion, but it is based on current academic research, and it was written by 26 academic researchers. Not all opinions are equal, and just because something is an opinion doesn't mean it's wrong. Shouldn't Eddie in all of his great humility at least consider the possibility that 26 scientists who have studied this field for their entire lives might actually have an opinion that's just slightly more valid than a 21-year-old kid who learned everything he knows from online universities?
Wow, that's really fucking interesting. I wonder why. I wonder why it's called an opinion and not a fucking fact. You should look at the conflict of fucking interest on this paper, you dumbass.
How would you know about the conflicts of interest, Eddie? You've never read it. This paper is a systemic review of other studies, so even if the authors had a conflict of interest, they're not the ones who actually conducted the research. Besides, you seem to be completely unfamiliar with this piece of research. That seems pretty odd to me since you consider yourself to be such an expert, yet you've never even looked at this very important summary of all the research. Not to mention, let's be honest here, Eddie, you and literally every other keto and carnivore influencer on the internet has a conflict of interest too. So if you think we should dismiss this review because of that, then people should dismiss everything you say too.
Plausibility. LDL and other apolipoprotein, ApoB containing lipoproteins. Blah, 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 blah. What? Where is the end? Oh, okay. Are directly implicated in the initiation and progression of atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease. No, they're not. No, they're not. It's damage to the endothelium. What is your evidence for that? Experimentally induced elevations in plasma LDL. Oh, so induced. So you've done it unnaturally. You've done it unnaturally. Okay.
So he criticizes the experiments where LDL was lowered by drugs and diet because he says it was done unnaturally. Again, this is just Eddie refusing to accept any human data showing causality. But then, later in the video, we'll see that he criticizes the Mendelian gene studies, which is ironic because that's literally an experiment in nature that shows the same results as the randomized controlled studies. So nature actually agrees with my conclusions, not Eddie's.
Oh, this is the problem with actually going through all of the studies on a video like this. It would take for fucking ever.
Actually, you would have had enough time had you not wasted so much time talking about philosophy, theology, and politics, not to mention insulting me so much. So this just sounds like an excuse to me.
The disease was named familial hypercholesterolemia, and it was soon recognized that the elevated cholesterol levels were associated with a 20-fold increase in the incidence of heart attacks in middle age. See, this is actually quite interesting because there are two ways that you can define familial hypercholesterolemia, and one of the definitions is completely ridiculous. One of the definitions is merely exhibiting higher cholesterol levels beyond the normative levels of the population. That seems to be genetically sort of inherited. The other is actually a genetic problem where you actually cannot absorb any excess cholesterol from the bloodstream, in which this actually does occur.
So after he reads this damning evidence that high LDL cholesterol causes heart disease, he goes off into a tangent where he talks about how there are two types of familial hypercholesterolemia. But he never goes back and addresses the point about the increased risk of heart disease. So why is familial hypercholesterolemia associated with a 20-fold increase in heart disease? Eddie never answers this question, but I'll give you a hint. It's because of the higher cholesterol.
Yeah, low-density lipoproteins and high-density lipoproteins. When he studied plasma from heart attack patients, Goffman found a major increase in the cholesterol-carrying LDL. Okay, so instead of reading all of this, because it would take way too much damn time... Run away! Run away! Run away! Let's cover a very simple fact. Let's cover the actual facts surrounding heart disease. Ready for this? Okay. Heart disease does not occur on the venous side of the vascular system. It does not occur in veins. Despite the fact that veins and arteries carry the same exact cholesterol content. The exact same cholesterol content.
So now Eddie is finally giving his theory as to why atherosclerosis happens. He points out that atherosclerosis occurs in the arteries, but not in the veins, and makes this out to be some sort of big gotcha against the lipid hypothesis.
Well, I mean, even if I stopped right there, that would be sufficient. We're done.
Nope, you're not done yet, Eddie.
Okay. Not only does it not occur in the venous side and only occurs in the arterial side, it only occurs in set sites in the arterial side. Those sites having really only one common denominator, and that is that all of the sites experience the most turbulent blood flow.
Yes, turbulence that causes damage to the arterial wall is a necessary factor, but not a sufficient condition to get atherosclerosis. You also need cholesterol. People with very low LDL levels also get damage to the arterial walls, but they don't get atherosclerosis. LDL is absolutely necessary for atherosclerosis to form. So if the LDL is low enough, it will never happen. That's why people who are born with a PCSK9 gene deficiency have very low LDL cholesterol levels and have a very low incidence of atherosclerosis. Eddie seems to think that atherosclerosis can only have one cause and that there can't be multiple factors involved that cause atherosclerosis. Nothing could be further from the truth. We know factors like LDL cholesterol, high blood pressure, diabetes, smoking, and many other risk factors all contribute to atherosclerosis. It begins with injury to the arterial wall, but that's just the first step. You need cholesterol in order for it to progress further.
Because if the injury to the arterial wall, which elicits LDL to come to the site in the first place, because LDL helps to heal tissue, if it does not ameliorate itself, then the LDL stays there and has a higher propensity to become oxidized and or glycated with hyperglycemic events, which will elicit an even further inflammatory response because now the body recognizes them as foreign proteins. They're unrecognizable, which will launch even more inflammation on the area, which will cause even more plaque buildup.
So he's saying that LDL goes into the atherosclerotic lesion to try to heal it, but then he says it gets oxidized, which causes inflammation and makes things worse. So, am I missing something here? He's basically admitting that LDL is a factor in the progression of atherosclerotic plaque. The way he's describing the mechanism is the equivalent of throwing someone out the window and saying that it wasn't the fall that killed him, it was the impact. Even if the LDL had good intentions, which is very debatable, Eddie is admitting that it contributes to the problem. So why does he reject the idea that more LDL cholesterol causes more problems? Eddie already believes in the lipid hypothesis, he just won't admit it. Controlled trials were changing the LDL using either diet or drugs, including both statins and non-statin drugs.
Right, great idea. Use a statin, an unequivocal mitochondrial poison, because of the downregulation that it induces of the production of your CoQ enzymes in your electron transport chain, a mobile enzyme. I almost said protein, but it's actually, fun fact, the only molecule in the electron transport chain, and really in the mitochondria, that is not a protein. It's an enzyme. But it is not made of protein. It's a mobile transport enzyme, and it is directly involved in the creation of ATP. You knock down the production rate of that, you're going to get inflammation. And then you're going to get the death of cells.
So Eddie's next big rant is about statins because, big surprise, just like everyone else on the carnivore diet, he's against them. He says statins kill the mitochondria, which kill cells, which could theoretically kill people because people cannot survive without mitochondria. Okay. So where is the outcome data that proves this? Statins are some of the most prescribed drugs in the entire world, so there should be millions of bodies piling up by now. So where are all the dead statin users, Eddie? Also, the outcome data shows that statins improve longevity, so there's no reason to think that this effect on coenzyme Q is clinically significant other than possibly causing some muscle aches, which is a documented side effect of statins. What Eddie is doing here is the equivalent of saying that we shouldn't eat apples because they contain cyanide, even though nobody has ever died of cyanide poisoning from eating an apple in human history.
Because you're talking about thousands upon thousands of percentage point increases in the incidence rate. The mechanism is extremely clear there. Notice how I'm not making a causal inference, but I'm saying, I would say you're stupid if you said that that association should be ignored. That's a tough one to ignore. That's on the same scale as smoking and lung cancer.
So he's quoting a study that shows that statins cause ALS. However, whatever happened to the whole you can't prove causation from an association? The study Eddie quoted is associative data, which he says he rejects. So Eddie admits that it's just associative data, but in this case, he says you'd have to be stupid to deny causality from it. Well, maybe you're the one being stupid for denying causality from the research on LDL cholesterol. It seems even with your vaunted humility, you have an academic blind spot when it comes to LDL cholesterol. So much so that you deny causation from the research even when 99% of all the studies come to the same conclusion and they involve hundreds of thousands of subjects.
That's a tough one to ignore. That's on the same scale as smoking and lung cancer, which still cannot be used to establish a causal relationship. You use it to base an opinion off of it. Or you use it to formulate an opinion based off of that data.
Now he's seriously making the outrageous claim that you can't make a causal inference between smoking and lung cancer. You can only form an opinion. It's too bad that Eddie wasn't around in the 1950s because the tobacco companies would be fighting to hire him as a spokesman.
This is called humility. And you need to learn how to exhibit some.
Which is the very last thing you've shown in this video, Eddie. Will modify the risk.
No, it won't modify the risk. It is associated with a different incidence rate. You need to convey the science properly. You didn't even acknowledge my use of the word risk and when to use risk and when to not use risk. You just said, that is false, wrong.
So every time I say the word risk, this kid loses his shit. He gets so angry at me claiming that you can't use the word risk. Unfortunately for Eddie, risk is used throughout all the medical literature, and it is actually used in statistics, which is something Eddie claims he's an expert on. So I don't know why he can't just accept the common English meaning of the word risk. Risk just means the possibility of harm. How hard is that to understand, Eddie?
Unfucking believable.
I already mentioned the Hill criteria for establishing causation earlier.
No. You're talking about Bradford Hill criteria now. And Bradford Hill criteria is more opinionated. It is an opinion, not fact.
So here he finally realizes that what we're talking about is the Hill criteria. Like I said before, he considers this to be just some random person's opinion, which is technically true, but when this guy's opinion has been used successfully to determine causation again and again for about a century now, including proving that smoking causes lung cancer, I think there's a certain value to that opinion, which places it well above Eddie's opinion. Those criteria. If you're as nihilistic as Eddie is about the inability to establish causation,
that is the best thing that I'm so happy that you just brought this up. Wow.
So this is what pissed off Eddie more so than anything else in the entire video. He got even more pissed off than when I used the word risk. The reason I called Eddie a nihilist is because he doesn't think anything can be done to establish causality, at least as far as human disease is concerned. I'm actually surprised he even accepts germ theory, since the presence of germs in infected tissue is just an association that, according to Eddie, can't be proven to be causal. Germ theory is just an opinion too, yet he believes in it. So again, Eddie is very selective in how he applies his epistemology. I'm not even sure Eddie actually believes causality exists at all. He basically says that reality is just chaos and that there is no order to it, which sounds like something a JRPG villain would say. He finds it liberating to believe this, and this is useful for him since it allows him to reject evidence without ever having to properly analyze anything. That's why he ignores the data I presented in my video.
There are plausible mechanistic speculations as to how it can cause lung cancer. We also know that the mechanism is right there in the open, that being, well, when you inhale smoke, it goes into your lungs, and then there's a very, 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 very high incidence rate correlated with smoking of lung cancer.
So Eddie kind of backtracks here on the association between smoking and lung cancer and says that since there are plausible mechanistic speculations about how smoking could cause lung cancer, therefore we should believe it. But you can say the exact same thing about LDL cholesterol. LDL cholesterol mechanistically contributes to atherosclerosis, and even Eddie admitted that. So why is it so hard to believe elevated LDL cholesterol would increase the risk of heart disease when we have sound mechanistic explanations for it, not to mention hundreds of studies worth of outcome data? This is a complete contradiction from Eddie.
However, do you know why you can't still establish causality from that logic alone? Because what if the incidence rate of lung cancer in smoking populations always took place in an area that had high industrial activity of air that was also toxic to the lungs.
So Eddie's setting up a complete straw man argument here. There is no evidence that the smoking studies that were done in the 50s and the 60s were done only in areas of high pollution. And if they were, then it still would affect both the smokers and the non-smokers equally, so it doesn't matter.
Well, this causes this, but this study says that it doesn't cause this. And there's just a bunch of conflicting data all the time. That's a recipe for nihilism. That's a recipe for throwing your hands up in the air and going, well, I don't know what the f*** to do. I'm just going to eat a balanced diet then. It's liberating. It's not nihilistic. It's liberating.
There are always going to be a few outlier studies made by people with an agenda that you can cherry pick, but in the case of LDL cholesterol and heart disease, the overwhelming majority of data supports the fact that LDL cholesterol causes heart disease.
Go ahead, read more from your script, though. That was probably generated by ChatGPT in many instances.
So, as you just saw, at this point of the video, he criticizes me for scripting my video and using ChatGPT. So, just to address the whole ChatGPT thing first, that is just downright slanderous. He might as well be accusing me of plagiarism. This would be like me claiming his book was ghostwritten, which for the record, I don't believe. People who follow my channel know that I am not very tech-savvy. Other than my YouTube channel, I abstain from all forms of social media, and I don't use any artificial intelligence or even understand how it could be used to write a script. Hell, I don't even use a smartphone. I use a dumb phone. Here it is right here. This is a punked MPO2. All I can do is just call and receive text. That's it. I've been doing science-based videos which have a plethora of scientific research for a very long time on my channel, years before ChatGPT even existed. I don't trust AI because I know it can hallucinate data and misrepresent research. So all my research is done the old-fashioned way. I look up articles using tools like Sci-Hub and PubMed, and I keep them in a big database, and my research folder is absolutely massive. For example, here is the list of the articles that I have included as references for my carnivore diet video alone. I have tons of research and I looked them up all myself. How many references and scientific studies do you use for your videos, Eddie? That's right, 0. As for me scripting my videos, I will admit that claim is mostly true. Most of my videos are at least partially scripted, and I have always been open about that fact. But do you want to know why I do that, Eddie? It's so my videos don't end up being like yours. I script my videos to keep myself on point, so I don't end up rambling and explaining something in 30 minutes that could easily be explained in just 5 minutes. I could do these videos unscripted if I really wanted to, and some my videos actually are unscripted, but I usually prefer to at least partially script my videos because scripting my videos makes them better. And I also do it because I have respect for my viewers' time. I know that my viewers are real people who have real lives outside of social media, and so it is only fair that I make my point without having to take away 4 hours of their life. The person who should really consider scripting his videos is you, Eddie, because I can promise you right now that none of your viewers are going to watch your entire video. Not a single one. I'm probably the only one who actually watched your video all the way through, but that's only because I am responding to it. And even after 4 hours of listening to your rambling, incoherent response, I feel you've said practically nothing. So thanks for wasting my time.
There are plenty of associations that show that with thousands upon thousands and upon thousands of people that show that higher cholesterol levels, LDL levels, were associated with longer lifespans, for example.
There are some outlier studies. However, if you take all the studies as a whole, there is no question that LDL cholesterol predicts heart disease. So why does Eddie have faith in these outlier studies if he doesn't believe that causation can ever be established? His criteria changes based on which study he's looking at. Got the data from literally dozens of independent...
All right, let's look at this. Magnitude of exposure to lower LDL-C, millimoles per liter. You're right, this is from the consensus study. The consensus panel opinion. Right. Mendelian randomization. There you go. Okay, so not exposure. We're done.
This graph is not an opinion. This is scientific data. This is a graph of the results of many different studies, and it strongly supports the claim that LDL cholesterol is associated with heart disease. It's not an opinion. It's math. So this is an example of how Eddie analyzes data. He just takes a quick glance at it and then doesn't even bother reading the paper or even the figure legend. He misreads the graph and assumes that all it contains is the Mendelian data, and he says, we're done.
Not to mention that once again, they weren't measuring exposure. They were observing the people.
Yes, they were measuring exposure, Eddie. They were measuring the LDL levels. Whether those levels were due to genetic or environmental factors, they were still the actual levels, and they correlated very strongly with the risk.
Okay, so 12 years, median follow-up 12 years of N of 400,501. Okay, great.
So he even admits that the studies have a long follow-up interval and a large number of subjects, but he still discards these studies anyways because he claims they are biased. He doesn't back that up with anything. It's just an accusation, not to mention Eddie's obviously extremely biased too.
The standard error is the sample standard deviation in your samples that you conduct in that population divided by the square root of the sample size that is used in every sample. See, I actually understand this okay? So it better be reported with a standard deviation. And even then, it's associative. Why? That might sound desperate. I completely lend full credence to that argument. I understand.
You do sound desperate, Eddie. At least I should say that your arguments sound desperate. You criticize some of the statistics used in the graph, but you don't even bother to verify what statistics were actually used. So you're just casting shade without even bothering to check out the facts.
Now imagine, though, that the way that they reduced the LDL was through statins. Well, then you cannot say that the reason for that direct one-to-one R-squared value of 1 association, negative correlation, was due to the lowering of LDL. Why? Because statins actually happen to have chemically speaking, they have an anti-inflammatory effect. Well, so they didn't just reduce LDL, they also reduced inflammation on a chemical level.
Here he tries to discard the statin data because he claims that statins work as anti-inflammatory drugs. Even if you believe that is true and you discard the statin drugs completely, you still have a very strong correlation, especially when you look at other cholesterol-lowering medications that have completely different mechanisms, like PCSK9 inhibitors that work completely differently from statins. Literally the only thing they have in common with statins is that they both lower cholesterol, yet they both reduce the risk of heart disease. Also, we know that PCSK9 inhibitors are actually more effective than statins because they lower cholesterol even more than statins do.
So, anyway, okay. So relative risk reduction. So no, relative incidence.
So it's that damn word risk again that's setting him off. He's mad that the term relative risk reduction was used in the paper, but that's a term that's used in millions of scientific papers. So it's probably a good thing Eddie doesn't read scientific research because he'd probably lose his mind.
0.7 between 0.75 to 0.79, right? So it's right around there. It seems quite consistent in terms of the proportion. So, and then p-value of less than 0.001, which is supposed to indicate statistical significance. Okay, which also begs the question as to whether or not something is practically significant merely based on statistical significance being achieved, which is a fallacy, I'm telling you. So, relative risk of major vascular events. And then, yeah, 1 here. And then look, this is all weighted between group difference and achieved LDL-C level 0.2, 0.4, 0.6, 0.8, 1.0. And it's just going up, right? And I'm assuming that the dotted lines are a confidence interval, but we already see that the confidence interval, there's not too much noise around that signal in this situation. Right, okay. Fibrates, 9 trials. So they basically aggregate a bunch of trials together. I'm assuming this is then a meta-analysis then. This is a meta-analysis. So it's actually, then you have to look at I would say that you have to look at the methods employed, but they're kind of giving that already. Statins, niacin, diet, fibrates, ezetimibe, yes, right. CETP inhibitors, 3 trials. Bile acid sequestrants, 2 trials. So all different methods, which begs an entirely different question.
So he looks at another graph from the paper, and it looks like he had trouble finding anything wrong with it. But then, he notes that the LDL was reduced by different methods in this graph, which he considers to be a weakness. But on the contrary, that's actually a strength of the research. It proves that no matter how you lower your LDL cholesterol, your risk of heart disease goes down. If they had only lowered it with statins, then Eddie could have successfully argued that it could have been due to an anti-inflammatory effect from statins. But by including treatments that are completely different from statins, and that still show to reduce risk of heart disease, this proves that the common denominator here in preventing heart disease is lowering LDL cholesterol levels.
Okay, but cool, great. We understand what we're looking at, and we see a decrease 0.001 0.01, 0.02, what is, by the way, MLD here?
He then tries to criticize another graph from another paper which shows that reduction in LDL cholesterol improves coronary artery disease, and the graph is based on multiple different studies. Here, though, we get to see how intellectually lazy Eddie really is, because he keeps asking what MLD means in the graph. But if he had just looked at the paper and looked at the legend of the graph, he could have seen that it means, quote, mean luminal diameter, unquote, which means how blocked off the coronary arteries were. So, how are we supposed to take Eddie seriously if he doesn't even take the time to read the papers he's criticizing? He criticizes me for not being able to interpret research, but at least I actually read the research, Eddie. Eddie, on the other hand, seems to think he can interpret research without even reading it. So I think Eddie needs to seriously take his own advice on humility.
But this is what this reminds me of. Oh, you should use the statins to prevent the plaque from building up in the first place. Because, oh, well, the LDL goes down, and without the LDL, you won't get as much plaque buildup. Or if any at all, actually, as we've already covered. Yeah, but is that the actual appropriate approach? Or should you, what else can you do? Can you mitigate the injury that you're inducing into the arteries?
So he kind of admits that if you lower LDL cholesterol, the plaque won't build up, but then he suggests that the solution is to not lower cholesterol, but to mitigate the injury. Okay, but why not do both? If you have high blood pressure and also have high LDL cholesterol levels, why not lower both of them and kill two birds with one stone? The only reason he wants to address just one part of the problem is because the cholesterol part conflicts with his carnivore diet dogma.
Get the f*** out of here, you f***ing moron. Who the f*** do you think you are? So, anyway.
Strongly urge Eddie to read this recent thorough review article on...
Well, we already covered it. There's no need to read this. I'm sorry. There really is no need to read this.
So when I brought up the article that explains the mechanistic pathogenesis of atherosclerosis, he just instantly dismisses it and refuses to read even any of it. Eddie, this should be your cup of tea, bro, because this is mechanistic data, which you and I both know you love. That's why I brought it up, because even if we base our conclusions on just mechanistic data, you're still wrong, and this article could have explained why to you if you even bothered to read it, which you didn't. So it's clear that you don't care about outcome data, but you also don't even care about mechanistic data, unless of course it supports your biases.
Great. Woo! Oh boy. The plaque there is composed largely of scar tissue, not cholesterol in the first place. Yes, that is the calcified plaque. However, the calcified plaque comes from soft plaque. To be extremely fair. But what I'm saying is that over time, even if you had soft plaque, let's say that you had a very small degree of soft plaque, but it never went beyond that point. Well, it doesn't matter how much of it's made of cholesterol then. The plaque that actually causes the heart attacks is the hard plaque once it has persisted, the injury has persisted, for decades.
Wrong. So, Eddie actually corrects himself here. He said in the original video that plaque is largely composed of scar tissue. He corrects himself and states that only end-stage plaque is scar tissue, but then says that this is the kind of plaque that causes heart attacks. That's completely false. It's actually the soft plaque that is full of cholesterol that really causes heart attacks in people. It is the soft plaque that actually ruptures to cause heart attacks, so Eddie is just completely wrong here. Atherosclerotic heart disease is present even in people with systolic blood pressures less than 100 millimeters of mercury.
That's fantastic. You know what? It would be even more if the blood pressure was higher. I would suspect, at least. Again, multiple confounding variables that can have an antagonistic effect to that.
I agree there are multiple variables, and LDL cholesterol is definitely one of them.
Great.
Species inappropriate, species unspecific. Diet. Okay.
Whatever the hell that means, but...
Yes. Oh, God, wow! Species appropriate, species specific refers to a set of behaviors, in this case specifically dietary behavior, that the genes of said species across its genome, with very minimal variation depending on what environment they specifically evolved under or evolved within, that their genes across their genome most evolved to genotypically withstand, what they're most genotypically adapted to. Now, there are arguments that you can make against it. You haven't made them yet. Maybe he will.
It sounds like he's making the appeal to nature fallacy.
Ah, there it is. Wow.
So Eddie is getting absolutely hysterical over me accusing him of appealing to nature, but let's face it, he kinda is. He uses terminologies like species-appropriate diet. Appropriate based on what? I assume he means anthropological data, which is by its definition appealing to nature, but more importantly, it's also completely wrong. The reason why I mentioned the steak and butter gal part of my video is because that's where I went over all the data, but obviously Eddie didn't watch that part. But since I did that video, I actually found even more data to contradict the claim that a carnivore diet is a species-specific diet for human beings. But rather than interrupt the flow of this video, I'll go over this new data at the end of this video.
Is a risk to the organism. It poses a risk. Now, the risk is not the same. It's not like, it's either a risk or not a risk. There are degrees of risk that are really impossible to measure.
Eddie, please stop. You'd kill me if I spoke about risk instead of association the way you're speaking about it now.
Cohort, I guess. You see that we should be living, purportedly, according to these scientists, around 120 to 150 years of age. If we just got out of our damn way, basically, is what they're implying.
That's just complete rubbish. There is no credible source of anyone making a serious case that we can live to 120 or 150 if we just ate the right diet, which Eddie obviously thinks is the carnivore diet. You have to provide a source if you're going to make a claim like that, dude. I'll admit, this is the closest Eddie comes to actually telling the truth, because—
Oh, yeah, this is the closest I come to actually telling the truth. I'll admit, I'll feign a sense of humility to make myself, to aggrandize myself in the perception of ignorant followers and ignorant viewers so I can beguile them into my ideology and lull them in to a vegan anti-human lifestyle. Yeah, good.
Okay, you can call me ignorant, but don't trash talk my followers. I didn't take any cheap shots against your viewers, so show a little class. Also, I have never tried to beguile my viewers into following a vegan lifestyle. I don't even run a vegan channel, dude. A lot of my viewers don't even know I'm vegan.
What's the mechanism? When you actually know the etiology of heart disease, you understand that being a sedentary lifestyle is not a causal factor. If anything, a more intense, active lifestyle, if anything, would raise your risk. But of course, yeah, you have to look at the net effects and all that stuff. I'm not saying to never engage in exercise. I always say the opposite, actually. But I'm saying if you actually understand the mechanisms, there you go. Because, oh God, because if you're sedentary, you're not damaging your arteries unless you're doing other things. It's because sedentary lifestyles, if anything, in my opinion, it's because sedentary lifestyles are more associated with other colloquially considered unhealthy behaviors like eating a bunch of bad shit and also smoking, maybe.
Eddie is right that a sedentary lifestyle probably is associated with other bad habits, but there is plenty of data showing that exercise by itself improves health outcomes, and I don't think I have to justify that with any evidence. If anyone seriously believes that exercise isn't good for you, then they're just living in some fantasy world, or they're just coping with the fact that they're too lazy to go to the gym. This is such a fringe position that I don't even think other carnivore dieters support it, at least I hope not. Dare I say it? I think he is cherry-picking research.
Oh, wow. I'm actually not looking at any research, really, at all, for the reasons that I laid out. I'm looking at other inferences.
So now we all know why there is no research in Eddie's videos. It's because he doesn't even bother looking for them in the first place. He just said so.
Unbelievable.
Inflammation, which worsens the atherosclerotic plaque formation.
Hold on a minute. What?
Not repair tissues. It causes inflammation, which worsens—
Wow. Okay, so what would happen without LDL? Oh my God. I've got to stop it at this point. No way. Absolutely no way is this being said right now. Is this rage bait? Because it's working on me. Damn.
So Eddie is once again really pissed off that I claim that LDL causes inflammation. He counters this by saying that if you had no LDL, you couldn't live. But that's a straw man argument. I'm not arguing that we should try to get our LDL levels to 0. I'm just saying that LDL should ideally be below 70 because at that threshold, the risk of developing heart disease becomes extremely low. Whatever physiological need we have for LDL cholesterol, our bodies will produce enough of it. Very good reason why diets rich in plant-based foods like the Mediterranean diet have actually been—
The Mediterranean diet is not a diet. That is a constructed diet that was constructed from epidemiologists by studying certain foods as the consumption was reported in certain demographics of the Mediterranean region. And once again, it's based on associative
So I guess literally everything is based on associative data, even diets. Yes, the Mediterranean diet, just like all other diets, is a constructed diet, but it is based on the traditional diet of humans who have lived around the Mediterranean Sea for thousands of years, and we know based on Blue Zone data that they have exceptional longevity compared to other populations. So even though it is a constructed diet, just like every other diet, it doesn't matter because the health outcomes show that it is the best diet for health and longevity. Wrong, and the data proves that.
No, it doesn't prove anything. You're not God, okay? Stop playing it.
No, you can survive without carbs. There's no good reason to avoid healthy.
Good reason is a value judgment statement that is reflective of your opinion, that you have no ability to reinforce with the data that you're referring to.
Yes, I do, Eddie. I've been showing it to you throughout this entire video, and since you suddenly have decided that you care about evidence now, where is all the evidence that the carnivore diet is a safe and healthy diet? The carnivore diet has really only been in vogue for, I think, like 5 years now or so, and there are no long-term studies about it. If we look at it mechanistically, we know it's high in saturated fat, which increases LDL in the blood, and even you admit that LDL plays a role in the development of atherosclerotic plaque. So, by your own mechanistic criteria, Eddie, you would predict that the carnivore diet causes heart disease. You just have a blind spot in this instance because you're so biased.
Oh, but that's associative data and it doesn't prove causation.
Well, it doesn't, but it doesn't mean that you can't form an opinion upon it, like you can with smoking and lung cancer. That doesn't prove causation either, but my opinion is that you'd be a idiot to believe that smoking doesn't cause lung cancer. It's incongruous with what our genes most evolved to genotypically withstand. The mechanism is right there. Lung cancer, smoke goes into your lungs, okay? And also, most of those people present with breathing problems even beforehand and coughing issues. Also, it's repeatable. It's been repeated multiple times on every population that smokes. That's another good gauge. But again, these are all opinions. You're a tyrant that wants to believe that your opinions can be established as fact.
Whoa! So Eddie finally comes down on the side of science. It says that you'd be a fucking idiot not to believe that smoking causes lung cancer. So yeah, of course, I agree completely, but I also think you'd be a fucking idiot not to believe that LDL cholesterol also causes heart disease. The data we have on LDL causing heart disease is even stronger than the data linking smoking to lung cancer. So this is a complete contradiction by Eddie, and at no point does he explain why it's okay to believe one but not the other.
We're effectively done right there. We are. We're done. I mean, there you go. All you have to do is look at the presentation of your typical vegan and then look at the presentation of a typical carnivore, and there you have your answer. So,
Eddie, what the hell are you smoking, bro? Carnivore dieters look like complete shit. Pretty much all of them look like balding, bloated human tomato hybrids with bright red skin, although that may have something to do with the fact that they're all anti-sunscreen. I have never seen a female carnivore influencer who looks as good as Bianca Taylor, or a male carnivore influencer who looks as good as Brian Turner. Both of these influencers are vegan, and I can show you many other examples as well. So, hopefully you snap out of it soon, Eddie, otherwise you could end up as a carnivore tomato too, so don't say I didn't warn you. Also, let's go back to that picture of Bianca Taylor for a moment. Yeah, you know you wouldn't say no to that, Eddie. Because the strongest medical evidence confirms that having an...
according to whom, on the basis of what? You? On the basis of no understanding of the science? Patently? Demonstrably?
No, nothing I have been saying comes from me. Everything I am saying comes from hundreds of studies that have been done on this subject. I'm just reporting the data, that's all.
You absolute moron.
The same thing applies to statins. It may be true that the effects of the CoQ enzyme might explain some of the muscle aches that people get on statins, but...
Okay.
Effects aren't anywhere near as important as Eddie is implying.
According to the results of the studies that have been done, and really when I say have been done, not have been done, have been released to the public. Some of them are not even able to be accessed. Did you know that? I wrote about this in my book, Contraindicated, in chapter 4.
But here he brings up a conspiracy theory about the data on statins being suppressed. But even if it were, I don't think it matters, because if statins could shut down your mitochondria and kill you, we would know by now just through an overwhelming number of case reports. But as I showed earlier, statins reduce the risk of dying, and any effect on the mitochondria is minor and won't cause much more than just occasional muscle aches.
If you aggregate the amount of time that you live for when you take statins versus when you don't take statins, you're gaining either a median or a mean, I don't know, can't remember, of less than 4 days of life.
That's a nice argument, Senator. Why don't you back it up with a source?
My source is that I made it the fuck up.
Okay, so pre and post, CoQ10 fold difference from pre. Well, hold on a minute. So, okay. This is the CoQ supplementation group. Okay. And then post, they had more. And then the placebo group, it was pre and post, which was basically the exact same here in the units that were measured here. 1, 2, I don't know what the unit is, but okay, fine.
So Eddie looked at a graph from a study I presented, and without reading the study, he just speculated about what the error bars were on the graph. He doesn't give any real rebuttal to the study because he didn't read it, of course, so let's just go ahead and move on.
Anyway, also you should look into the association, Cody's doctor, of, well, statin-taking populations and the presentation within those populations of ALS, an invariably fatal neurological condition, which is somewhere in the ranges of 11,000% or something like that, relative increase. I can put the study on the screen.
He claims that the study shows that statins cause ALS, but of course, this is just associative data, so why does Eddie even care about this data at all? Based on his own standards, it should be worthless. I mean, could it have something to do with the fact that it tells him something he wants to hear? Nah, I'm sure that's not possible. This review article, quote, animal food-centered diets may increase cardiovascular...
See that word may? You see that word may there? Because it can't inform upon it?
like receptor signaling due to increased serum endotoxins and oxidized LDL cholesterol.
Oxidized LDL is the result of LDL particles remaining in the bloodstream for longer than they ought to remain in indicated scenarios. We covered oxidized LDL.
Cardiovascular lipotoxicity, increased renin-angiotensin system components, and subsequent angiotensin II type 1.
Right, so this is actually an example of inappropriate, well, I mean, not even really inappropriate, you can do what you want, but mechanistic speculation based on data that is insufficient.
How does he know that the data is insufficient? He didn't even bother to read the study. He just speculates about where the data comes from, and since it doesn't confirm his biases, he just dismisses the data outright. That's Eddie's modus operandi in a nutshell. Now, you really convinced me that the internet, especially YouTube, desperately needs more oversight and moderation in order to protect people from the kind of...
Oh, wow. So he's also in favor of censorship. I mean, look, this gets into another conversation surrounding, you know, how should YouTube, since it's a private company, be able to enforce that rule however they want to? I actually tend to lean towards the yes realm, but...
No, I don't want censorship. I just want better oversight of the internet in order to protect the world from misinformation. I mean, people can say or believe whatever they want. That should never be suppressed. But not everybody deserves a platform. I mean, just look at what social media has done to society. It's horrible. We're having more people believe in conspiracy theories than ever before. It's now become mainstream to believe that the moon landing was fake, that the earth is flat, and that 9/11 was an inside job. We have groups like QAnon committing acts of violence. And yes, believing that high LDL cholesterol levels don't cause heart disease is yet another conspiracy theory that has been emboldened and amplified by social media. Social media is absolutely to blame for this because their algorithms promote harmful content, and I am tired of them getting away with it. The status quo for the internet is clearly not working in society's interest, and all I want is for something to be done about it before we end up living in a post-truth society.
Wow. So no one can ever cite an anecdote as a positive, as a reason to do something? Because actually that's how things work. Someone tells you their experience with something and they go, oh, wow, I think I might try that. And then they do it and they see if it works for them. That's typically, that's how that works. All we have are anecdotes, really.
Sure, if you throw away all the scientific research ever done, then all you have left after that are anecdotes. The big problem with anecdotes, though, is that no matter what kind of anecdotal claim someone makes about something, you can always find someone who also makes the opposite claim. There are plenty of people who have quit the carnivore diet claiming it caused them health problems, just as there are people who claim veganism didn't work for them. That's why the best way to determine who's right is by looking at high-quality clinical research with proper controls and sufficient sample sizes.
There's not the carnivore diet trademark. There are many carnivore diets, some of which are appropriate, some of which are ostensibly inappropriate according to the Darwinian principles of evolution.
I'd agree that there is no unique carnivore diet, but it doesn't matter because all of them are bad. Literally all these carnivore influencers have some sort of conflict of interest since they're all selling something related to what they're promoting, like supplements, books, or programs. They promote the carnivore diet.
Oh, so this is all now about money. Of course, because if we really want to make money, we would promote the most fringe diet ever. Right. I mean, of course. That would be the easiest thing to do, right? It wouldn't be like, go on a standard American diet, promote that. Promote, the animal-based Paul Saladino diet, or promote veganism or vegetarianism. It wouldn't be doing that. It would be to promote carnivore and also say that it's totally fine to eat your meat raw. Yeah, that's the way to make money.
The carnivore diet is mainstream now because, like many other conspiracy theories, social media algorithms heavily promote it. There are pro-carnivore influencers who have millions of followers now. The carnivore diet is fringe within the scientific community, but it is popular with your average dumb shit who is easily duped by propaganda. So, Eddie is upset that I accused him and other carnivore influencers of doing it for the money, while at the same time, he criticized the authors of the opinion piece of having a conflict of interest. So, why the double standard, Eddie? At least in medical papers, the authors are required to disclose their conflict of interest, which of course isn't true of carnivore influencers on YouTube, some of whom make hundreds of millions of dollars like the Liver King.
Do you really think that I like being a rebel? Do you think that I like having to do these videos? And do you think that I like exposing myself to this? I would love to trust our institutions. I would love to not have to do this at all. It stresses me the out. And I do it anyway. I do it anyway. Because I have an obligation to do that as someone that has been jaded against the medical system, that has been jaded against the misinformation and disinformation promulgated from mainstream medical establishments and agencies, and authority agencies.
Eddie, I will be the first to admit that the medical system has definitely harmed people. One quick look at the opioid crisis in this country confirms it. But overall, modern medicine does a hell of a lot more good than harm, and it saves millions of people's lives every single year. I think what you should consider doing with your channel is, rather than taking this dogmatic black and white approach where you think the medical establishment is evil, why don't you just work on encouraging reforms in the system and trying to fix what is actually broken in it, rather than just dismissing medical research altogether? If you really believe in the carnivore diet, then you should support research that compares it to other diets, like the Mediterranean diet, and see how the health outcomes compare. The big problem is that people are promoting this diet without any long-term health or safety data, and the data that we do have indicates that it is a very harmful diet since it is high in compounds that we know promote diseases. So, I think you really need to go back to the drawing board here and better research the carnivore diet before drawing any kind of strong conclusions about it as you have. Like a toddler, grow up and eat your vegetables. God bless.
Oh, okay. I thought he was going to be atheistic or something. Maybe he'll be more receptive to what I was saying throughout this video then.
No. If I were an atheist, then I'd probably support the carnivore diet. Because let's face it, atheism is an ideology for internet edgelords, and the carnivore diet is an edgelord troll diet, so it's clearly not for me. So anyways, let's go ahead and get into the anthropological data that I mentioned that I would cover earlier. But before I do, this has been a very long video, so I need to wash my face, change my shirt, and take a shower because I've been sweating like crazy, so I'll be right back. So, since I made my carnivore diet video, I found even more evidence that a purely carnivorous diet is not in any way good, healthy, or even natural, contrary to what they claim. For example, if you look at the population of people who have the greatest longevity in the world, you find the so-called blue zones, where people consistently live to be over 100 years old. Now, if you look at the diet of these different groups of people, the one thing they all have in common is that they eat mostly plants. There's also evidence that red meat specifically causes harm above and beyond its effects on increasing LDL cholesterol levels. For example, red meat intake has been linked to the onset of dementia. This was a prospective cohort study that showed that red meat consumption in the diet was associated with a 13 to 14% increase in the incidence of dementia and cognitive decline. Substituting almost any other food group for red meat would result in improved mental function. Another concern with eating meat is what's called advanced glycation end products, or AGEs. These AGEs are oxidizing and inflammatory agents that are present in uncooked animal-derived foods, so they are kind of analogous to the anti-nutrients in plants, but the difference here is that plant lectins and other so-called anti-nutrients actually decrease when cooking plants, whereas these AGEs actually increase when cooking meat. So raw meat is already bad, but cooked meat is even worse. Also, if carnivore dieters are going to insist the mechanistic data and anthropological data is so damn important, then they should know that there is strong evidence that humans have evolved to more poorly digest meat over time. This article here explored the reason that red meat consumption is associated with the development of atherosclerosis in humans, while atherosclerosis isn't at risk in true carnivorous animals. Unlike carnivores, humans lack a specific enzyme called NEU5GC, and they lost the gene for that enzyme 2 to 3 million years ago, which is around the time when the carnivore dieters claimed that humans were the apex predators of the planet. The lack of this specific enzyme causes a whole spectrum of diseases in humans, including diabetes, increased LDL cholesterol, inflammation, and the acceleration of atherosclerosis. So, rather than being fine-tuned to eat meat, we are fine-tuned to get sick from eating too much meat and not enough plants, which provide things like antioxidants that counteract all the negative effects of meat. So, humans have evolved to actually be less carnivorous than our ancestors, even though humans have always been omnivores, and so have all of our closest relatives, like apes. Another one of the points brought up in the comments by some of my pro-carnivore viewers was a study that used isotope data to supposedly show that human ancestors only ate meat 2 million years ago. Here's the study. The article makes the claim that early humans were hyper-carnivores, eating almost exclusively meat acquired from hunting large animals like mammoths. Eventually, as these large animal species died out, humans added plants to their diets, and the article claims this only happened 85,000 years ago in Africa and as recently as 40,000 years ago in Europe and in Asia. And excuse me, that's a call I have to take. Alright, so getting back to the video, the authors base their claims mostly on isotope data, which they talk about in this section of the paper. Now, setting aside the obvious fact that carnivore dieters don't even know what an isotope is, nitrogen isotope measurements can give an idea of the ratio between plant and animal protein consumption in fossils. However, it is not a perfect technique. It actually has some theoretical biases that are pointed out in the article. The actual analysis of the isotope study shows a mixed picture which is not consistent with only meat consumption. The study doesn't even make the strong conclusion that humans were ever exclusively carnivores. They claim that during the Homo erectus and early Homo sapiens period, when there was a peak percentage animal diet, at most 70% of the diet was derived from animals. That's hardly an exclusively carnivorous diet, and after that brief moment in human history, meat eating declined and plant eating increased. It turns out that this article is extremely biased anyways, since one of the 3 authors created a food tracking app and he is a writer for thepaleodiet.com. But even better, there is newer research showing that this article is completely wrong about the diet of early human beings. One of the big problems with reconstructing the human diet is that evidence of animal consumption in early human settlements is easy to find since you can find discarded bones where people ate meat. Plants, however, don't leave behind the same traces, so a lot of the analysis of early human diet is heavily biased towards animal consumption. So this study looked more closely for traces of early human plant consumption, and the results totally contradict the previous study. The authors analyzed ancient human tools and found evidence of plant material on those tools. The results clearly show that our earliest ancestors used tools to prepare plant foods and that plants were a major component of the human diet almost 1 million years ago. Finally, if you believe the sound bites from Eddie about how LDL cholesterol is just an innocent bystander in the whole process of atherosclerosis, you should go ahead and read this article here. This article is a detailed deep dive into the molecular mechanisms by which eating a low-carb, high-saturated fat diet causes cardiovascular damage. It goes into the specific molecular mechanisms, so it is not something that can easily be put into a soundbite, but it is still a very thorough article and it is backed up by 283 references. The bottom line of the article is that excessive LDL cholesterol causes oxidative stress in the cells, and it also activates the angiotensin-renin system that can result in hypertension. There is also activation of what's called toll-like receptors, which produce an inflammatory response. The result of all this is vascular damage and atherosclerosis. As you can see from these figures, these mechanisms are complex, and the research is far deeper than Eddie would let on with his simple statements like LDL cholesterol doesn't cause atherosclerosis. In fact, the article goes over other negative effects of a low-carb diet, such as increased free fatty acids comparable to those seen in obese people and diabetics, as well as increased insulin resistance. So, the evidence of the harm from a high saturated fat diet is even more overwhelming than what I presented in my first video on the carnivore diet. Alright, chooms, so as you can see, this video took a very long time to finish. It's already nighttime outside, so I better get to bed because I have work early tomorrow morning, but I'll just go ahead and conclude by telling Eddie this. I did not make these videos to hurt you or your channel. I have nothing against you, I definitely don't hate you or anything. I just felt that there wasn't enough pushback against the claims carnivore dieters make, so I wanted to say something because it was kind of bothering me for a little while. But now that I've said my piece, I feel satisfied, so you can go ahead and have the last word if you want to, but as for me, I think it's time for me to get back to my channel's main focus, which of course is defeating the slaphead curse once and for all. Although, maybe I'll cover diet again in the future. I mean, do you guys think I should cover the repeat diet? Let me know in the comment section if you made it this far, if you think I should cover the repeat diet. But anyways, thank you all so much for watching this very long video. Good night, and God bless.